Well, hello Internet, and welcome to part 11 of my Learn to Program series. In this part of the tutorial, we'll cover static methods as well as static variables. I'll show you how to make your own modules. We'll also get deeply into exception handling, and if you haven't watched any of the previous parts of the tutorial, please watch that. I provide a link to the playlist on the screen here. Also in the description, you will find all of the code that is heavily commented as well as a transcript of the video, and I have a lot to do, so let's get into it. Alright, so first off we're going to cover static methods. Now a static method is going to allow access without the need to initialize a class, which means you'll be able to execute these methods without creating an object. And they are mainly used as utility methods, or also whenever it doesn't make sense for a real-world object to be able to perform a task, but you still need to have that method available. And I'll demonstrate it here so that you'll understand. Let's say we create a class called sum, and if you want to use a static method, you have to use the static method decorator, which we've seen previously. So you're just going to type in @ and then static method, and now it's a static method. And here you'll just type in whatever your name of your method is. I'm going to call this getSum, and it's going to receive a whole bunch of arguments. So there's our splat again, and here we're just going to sum all of the values that are passed inside of here. So you've seen this before, just wanted to demonstrate it. And sum, and we will increment all of these. And now we can return that sum, and then of course we will come down here and define main. And then inside of main, if we want to execute that, remember I said you don't need to create an object of that type. You can just simply come in and list the class name followed by whatever the function is or method that you'd like to execute. And then of course we have to come down here and call for main to execute and run it, and you can see right there it was able to go in and execute that. So there it is. That's a static method. That's how you create them, and this right here is how you call for them. So pretty cool stuff. Now I'm going to jump over and demonstrate a static variable. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dog class, and inside of it, if you want to create a static variable, it's very simple. You just come in here and you just create one. And if you create a field outside of any other methods, it's automatically a static variable. And what that means is the value of this is going to be shared by every object of type dog that is ever created. So let's come in here and let's initialize our dog objects. And I'm just going to have it pass in name, and I'm going to have unknown be in here as a default. And then we will of course assign name. And now if you want to reference this static variable, what you do is just precede it with whatever the class name is. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to be monitoring the number of dogs. This should be. I'm going to be monitoring every single time a dog object is created. And why does that make sense to do as a static field or a static variable? Well, it doesn't make sense for dogs to be able to count, and so there you go. So what I'm going to do is just simply increment that like this. And then also I'm going to come in here and create a static method. So there's a static method. And this is just going to receive or retrieve the number of dogs, number of dog objects that have been created. Doesn't need to do anything. And we will just say print, there are currently a certain number of dogs. And we'll put this inside of quotes, and then we will also use format on this. And if we want to get that value, once again, we're just going to go dog, num of dogs, and that's going to retrieve that static variable or field for us. And now what we're going to be able to do is come in here and create a bunch of different type of dog objects. So we'll call the first one spot, and that's going to increment number of dogs, as you're going to see, for all the other ones that are created. And we'll also create another one, and we'll just call this dog Steve. Let's call him Doug. And you'll be able to see if we call spot and then follow that up with get num of dogs and execute that, it's going to say there are currently 2 dogs. And that is going to stay the same for every single one of these guys. So just to prove that, let's come in here and let's do the same thing for Doug. Paste that in there. And you're going to see, there you go, 2 dogs. So that's a demonstration of a static field or a static variable. And now I'm going to jump over and show you how to create your own modules. What I'm going to do in a separate Python file inside of the same directory as where you have python.py, I'm going to come in here and just define a very simple little function. I'm going to call this getSum, and it's going to do exactly the same things it did last time whenever we used this. So there you go. And we're just going to save that. And then what we're going to do, you can pause the screen if you want to type that in. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and import that directly into my program. And to import it, you just list whatever the name of the file is minus the py part at the end. And then to get access to that function, you're just going to precede it with whatever the file name is and then the function that you want. So we're going to say print, and we'll say sum, and then after that you can just type in sum and the function that you want to execute. Do this for any type of function and you can see indeed that worked. So that's how you create your own custom little modules. Another thing that's important to know, however, is you can use from instead of import, and what it's going to do, what from's going to do, is copy specific functions from a module. So we can come in here instead and say from sum being the module you're copying from, you're going to say import getSum like that. Another thing you could do, however, is if you wanted to import all of the modules, you just put a star inside of there like that, and that would import everything. But I'm just going to leave it getSum because that's all that's in there right now. And if there were other functions in there, let's say getMult, I don't know. If you had multiple different functions you wanted to get out of there, you could just separate them with a comma right like that. And the benefit of using from instead of straight import is now you do not need to list the module's name whenever you use it. So you can just come in here and there's positives and negatives to that. Let's come in and just say getSum like that and run it, and there you go. So that's the benefit of from. Say you don't need to use that like you did with import. Now you can just list it like that. So pretty cool stuff. So there you go. That's how to create custom modules as well as how to use static variables and methods. And now let's jump in and talk more about exception handling. Now, as a review, exceptions are going to be triggered either when an error occurs or when you want an exception to be triggered. And we use exceptions to both handle errors, execute specific code when code generates something out of the ordinary, or to always execute code when something happens, for example, to close a file that was previously opened. And basically, when an error occurs, you're going to stop executing code and jump to execute other code that is going to respond to that error. So what I want to do here first is I'm going to basically handle an exception. What you're going to do is you're going to put your problematic code inside of a try block like this. And here I'm going to create a list that is going to have 3 individual pieces of data inside of it. And then what I want to do is try to print an index that doesn't exist. So I'm going to say a list, and I'm going to say I want whatever is in index 3. Well, there is no index 3. This is 0, this is 1, and this is 2. So what is this going to do? Well, this is going to trigger an error, and it's an error that I want to be able to handle. Specifically, that error is going to be called, or the exception that's going to be triggered is going to be called the index error. And how we're going to be able to catch that error is inside of an except block. So I'm going to type in except, and then if I know what my error is called, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to type in the error that I expect that could be triggered. Then I can print out a nice message on the screen rather than a whole bunch of nasty errors. Sorry, that index doesn't exist. And then finally, if another exception, meaning any exception, was triggered, and I want to be able to handle that in a special way instead of printing out a mass of different errors on the screen, I just type except without any specific exceptions over here, and I could say something like an unknown error occurred. And here you can see, if I run it, it says, sorry, that index doesn't exist. And that's a nice little message versus what you would normally get, which would just be a bunch of nasty codes and things like that that shoot out all over the screen. It's important to know that you can also catch multiple different exceptions with except just by separating them with a series of commas. So let's say I wanted to catch index error, and I also wanted to catch a name error exception. I could do so just like that, and I'll show you another example to get a little bit more deeply into exceptions. Now, it's also possible for us to make custom exceptions, So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a class, and I'm going to call this dog name error. Now this is obviously a silly sort of exception, but if you want to use this, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to inherit from the exception class, and to do that you just type in exception right like this. And I just want to say that it isn't very common that you would use your own custom exceptions, but just wanted to cover this just so you completely understand all the different options that are available. And inside of this, I'll initialize this guy. And to do so, just type in exception, and I'm going to call init for the exception. And for this, you're going to type in self, and you're also going to type in args and keyword args. I'll get more into keyword args in a tutorial that's coming up. So that's how simple it is to set it up. Of course, it could do a lot more than just this, but it's just basically going to handle this exception and allow us to use a custom exception. And what I'm going to do here is ask the user to enter their dog's name, and then I'm going to trigger an error if the name that they enter contains a number. So you've seen this before. I'm going to say if any, and I'll just say character is digit for character in dog name. So I'm going to be asking if any of the characters inside of dog name are going to be digits. Make sure it's dog name like that. And in a situation in which they do have a number inside of the dog name, I'm going to say that's not okay. And if I want to raise my own exception, I just type in raise, and I can type in dog name error. And then down inside of here, I can just say except dog name error, and then print out my custom error message, which will be your dog's name can't contain a number. And if we come in here and run it, what is your dog's name? And if I type in dog, everything's fine. If I run it in this side and I say something like R19, whoop, gave me an error. Sorry about that. Forgot to come up here and throw args and keyword args inside of here. Paste that inside of there. And now run it again. What is your dog's name? And I'll say U90. And you can see your dog's name can't contain a number pops up there on the screen, and it's handled. So that's how you make custom exceptions, and also how to raise exceptions. And you could also come in here and put in name error or any of the built-in errors that are inside of Python if you'd like to raise the errors that are built into Python or the exceptions that are built into Python. So now let's take a look at finally and else. Now finally is going to be used when you always want certain code to execute whether an exception is raised or not. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say num1, I'm going to get two pieces of data, and I'll say input, and I'll say enter two values to divide, and I'll provide that information or that division, and I'll put that on the screen. And of course, let's come in here and throw a split. So there we go. So we're going to get two numbers, and they are going to be split based off of white space. First number is going to go in num1, second one's going to go in num2. You guys have seen this already. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to say try, and I'll say quotient is going to be equal to, and I'll convert num1 into an integer. And the same with the num2. And now I can come in here and print, and I think you know what error is probably going to be triggered. And we'll do this is going to be equal to, and call for format to pull in the right information. And what we are specifically going to be putting in there is num1 inside of the first curly brackets, num2, and then quotient inside of there is the final result. Now the error or the exception that I would like to catch is what we call a zero division error, which means that they tried to divide by 0, which is a big no-no. And in this situation, I'll say print, you can't divide by 0. And then let's say that I want some code to execute if an exception does not occur. Well, that is why else is here. And in this situation, we could just submit it and say you didn't raise an exception. As the tutorial continues, we'll get more into more real-world uses of exceptions. I just want to keep this very simple so you can see exactly what's going on. And if there is certain code that you will always want to execute, whether an exception is triggered or an exception isn't triggered, you type in finally, and then you just say something like I execute no matter what. Alright, so let's come in here and test this guy out. Enter two values, and if we come in and we type 1 and 2. You're going to see that went perfectly fine. You didn't raise an exception comes in here. That's because else runs if an exception isn't executed. And the reason why that is the code inside of the else block is executed if an exception isn't raised. And let's come in here and finally, of course, is going to execute no matter what. And you're going to see that if I come in here and do like 3 and 0, boom, you can't divide by 0. You're going to see here an exception was raised, so the code inside of else wasn't printed. And you're also going to see once again that no matter what, whatever is inside of finally is going to be executed whether an exception was raised or it wasn't raised. Alright, so now I think it's time for a problem. Basically what I want you to do is I want you to create a file named mydata2, and it's going to be a text file, and just put any type of data inside of it, doesn't matter what it is. Then you're going to use what you learned in part 8 and a little bit of Google to find out how to open a file without using with, like I previously showed you. And you're going to try to open that file inside of a try block. You're then going to try to catch a file not found error exception. In else, if an exception isn't raised, you are going to print the contents of the file. In finally, you're just going to print out some type of message that is always going to be printed out on the screen. Doesn't really matter what it is. And then you are going to go in and try to open non-existent file, and its name is going to be mydata3.txt. And you're going to test and see what the differences are. Okay, so pause the video and try that out. I know you can do it. Otherwise, I'm going to write the code for you right now. Okay, so I went and created mydata2.txt and I threw some information inside of there. So I got that done. Now I'm going to use a try block to come in here and try to open a file without using with. So I'm just going to say my file is equal to, and how you do that is with open mydata2.txt is what I want to open up. And you're going to type in encoding is equal to, and we're going to use UTF again. Now I'm going to catch the exception, and I'm going to type in except, and like I told you, we're going to use file not found error. And I'm going to also forgot to talk about as. What as is going to allow you to do is access data and methods in the exception class. So I'm going to throw as inside of there, and I'm going to give it the name EX. And I'll be able to come in here and print something out. So let's say something like that file. And of course you didn't know about as, so don't worry about that if you didn't know. I just wanted to cover it because I'm here and I wanted to cover it. So I'm going to print out a message that said that file was not found. And let's go and call our exception here and have it print out some information on the screen. Let's just have its arguments printed out. Then I said inside of else, I want to print the content. So this is going to be triggered if it was able to find the file. And to print that information, I'm just going to keep it simple, and I'll just say file. And then to print this out, I just go my file, read, and I'll put that on the screen. And then, because this is not done with, I need to actually close the file afterwards. So I want to close my file. And then finally, doesn't matter what I put inside here, just something silly that's always going to print no matter what. I'll say something like finished working with file. And there you go. There is all of your code. And we'll come in and run it. Da 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 da. You're going to see some random text, more random text, and some more. I finished working with file. Everything was perfectly fine. However, if I come in here and change this to 3, a file that doesn't exist, and run it, you're going to see right here that file was not found. Once again, this guy here was triggered, and right here we printed out some information about the type of exception that was met. No such file or directory, and that's the information on it. And you can see once again that finally we're there. So there you go, guys. That's a rundown on a whole bunch of different things. If you didn't catch it or you weren't able to write this code, that's okay. Most important thing is just to be aware of and get used to solving problems. And like always, please leave your questions and comments below. Otherwise, till next time.